When you stand at the base of a massive towering mountain and you're just looking all the way up at the peak,
Oh, yeah, it's intimidating.
right? Your brain generally have one of two reactions to the sheer scale of it. Either you feel like entirely
It's just
insignificant.
reduced to this fragile little speck against a giant rock.
Exactly. Or,
Yeah.
secondly, you get this heavy surge of adrenaline dropping right onto your shoulders. Because, well, you realize you're the one who actually has to climb it.
It's the ultimate psychological tension, really.
Yeah.
We find ourselves caught between this crushing sense of our own vulnerability and then the sudden, undeniable demand of a monumental task.
And that push and pull, that whiplash between feeling completely powerless and yet being burdened with a world-altering responsibility.
Right.
That is the exact landscape we are exploring with you today. We are looking at a single historical primary source for this deep dive.
And it's a fascinating one.
It really is. It's an excerpted speech that actually takes the form of a prayer. It's known as speech number 4, and it carries the title, "Please allow us to become children who completely fulfill our responsibility."
Yeah, and for some context, this comes from the 1956 collection of Reverend Sun Moon's prayers, delivered specifically on May 23, 1956.
Right.
And it is just this dense, incredibly layered slice of mid-20th century rhetoric.
Which brings up a really important point before we dive in, because this is a religious and, political primary source from 1956.
Yeah, we have to be clear here.
Absolutely. Our job today isn't to validate or debunk the theology, and we are definitely not here to endorse any of the viewpoints contained within it.
We are strictly impartial.
Yeah, exactly. We're just putting on our analytical hats to look purely at the rhetorical machinery of this text. We want to unpack the framing and the underlying logic that the speaker uses to maneuver the listener's psychology.
And honestly, the architecture of the speech is a masterclass in psychological framing.
Yeah, it really is.
It systematically takes the listener from a state of total, almost defeated vulnerability and then rebuilds them into a position of absolute world-altering agency.
And the text establishes this anatomy of hardship and humility in its very first sentences.
Yeah.
Like right out of the gate.
Yeah, it doesn't waste any time.
It doesn't. The prayer opens by addressing the Father and immediately asking for strength because a, quote, rugged path still remains before us.
It definitely doesn't sugarcoat the reality of the environment.
Not at all. I mean, the speaker explicitly asks for the strength to remain to the end, even if we go over all the paths of death.
Paths of death. It is a striking way to begin an address that's meant to motivate a group of followers.
And then he goes even further, referring to the believers themselves as foolish children who are only gazing up at you.
Yeah, foolish children.
Okay, let's unpack this because this feels entirely counterintuitive to me. Well, if your goal is to rally a group of people to do something really difficult, leading with paths of death and calling your own followers foolish children seems like a terrible leadership strategy.
It does sound like terrible marketing, yeah.
Right. I mean, we're conditioned to think that purely uplifting, empowering messages, telling people they're invincible or uniquely gifted, is how you build a movement.
Yeah.
So why strip them down to absolute zero right away?
Well, what's fascinating here is the strategy behind it. If you tell people they are invincible, you inherently breed arrogance.
Oh, sure.
And in the context of a high-stakes, absolute spiritual mission, arrogance is fatal because it relies on human capability.
Which is obviously subjective and flawed.
Exactly. So by establishing total vulnerability, framing the believers as foolish children facing literal paths of death, the speaker is intentionally voiding out all human ego.
It's forcing a dependency.
Right.
Like if you've already admitted you're just a foolish child gazing upward, you can't possibly claim the glory for any future success.
Precisely. It highlights that any survival on this rugged path will not be the result of human brilliance. It will be the result of divine grace and courage bestowed upon them.
That makes a lot of sense.
But we also have to consider the specific historical moment here.
Right, 1956.
Yeah, May 1956 in South Korea. This is just 3 years after the armistice of the Korean War.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So the audience listening to this prayer wasn't imagining theoretical hardships. They had literally just survived paths of death.
That's crucial detail.
Their cities were destroyed, their country was fractured, and, trauma was just the baseline of everyday life.
So that reframes the foolish children comment completely. The speaker isn't insulting them.
No, not at all.
He's validating their profound sense of exhaustion and powerlessness. He is taking their existing trauma and essentially telling them, your feelings of smallness are correct, but they are a prerequisite for the cosmic work we are about to do.
Yeah, he weaponizes their vulnerability. It aligns their immediate historical trauma with a larger theological purpose.
Which positions them as the ultimate underdogs.
Right. Which means any success they achieve will be viewed as a miracle, not just some predictable outcome of human effort.
But, stripping away that human ego creates a massive psychological problem.
It does.
Because our ego, our sense of self-preservation, is what keeps us alive. Once you establish the external threats, these literal paths of death, the text immediately has to warn against the internal threat of the human mind trying to protect itself.
The ego sneaking back in.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the prayer pleads not to become children who are the objects of Satan's derision.
And the phrasing that follows that is perhaps the most intellectually dense part of the early text.
Yeah, let's get into that.
The speaker warns against becoming foolish people who calculate heavenly morality centered on ourselves.
I really have to push back on this concept, this idea of calculating morality being framed as a negative thing.
Okay, what do you mean?
Well, game theory and evolutionary biology both tell us that calculating risk, adapting the rules to our environment, and optimizing for survival is exactly what humans are built to do.
Sure.
It's like trying to bend the rules of a complex board game so they work in your favor. If you are navigating a path of death, you have to calculate your steps.
You have to survive.
Right. We naturally rationalize our actions to minimize discomfort. So why criminalize the very instinct that keeps humans alive?
Because the instinct that keeps a human alive physically is often the exact instinct that compromises an ideological mission.
Oh, interesting.
You are describing subjective adaptation, where the rules are twisted to serve the player's survival, and in a business or evolutionary context, yeah, that is a strength.
Right.
But this text demands absolute unselfish alignment with a higher will. Heavenly morality in this framework is an objective, immovable standard.
Okay, so running a cost-benefit analysis on your own morality is seen as the ultimate betrayal.
Exactly. If believers calculate morality based on their own logic or their own survival instincts, they are essentially replacing the divine will with their own comfort.
Because the math will never support extreme sacrifice.
Right. If you run a cost-benefit analysis on martyrdom, the math is never going to work out in favor of the mission. So the text has to preemptively destroy the concept of a cost-benefit analysis entirely.
It's a psychological tactic to just burn the boats.
Burn the boats, yeah. Perfect analogy.
Because if you leave room for calculation, you leave an escape hatch. When things get difficult on that rugged path, human nature will convince you that giving up is actually the moral choice, because it preserves life.
Exactly. And the speaker is saying that this immigrant calculation is exactly what makes you an object of Satan's derision.
Wow.
The real enemy isn't the external persecution, it's
the internal compromise.
Yes, it creates a fascinating internal policing mechanism. The listener is now hyper-aware that their own rational thoughts might be a form of spiritual betrayal.
So the ego has been entirely cleared out, and the instinct for self-preservation has just been locked away.
Locked away, yeah.
But nature abhors a vacuum.
Right.
If you remove a person's ego and you completely dismantle their survival instincts, you leave them completely empty.
You do.
You have to fill that void with something immediately, or the person just collapses.
And what the text fills it with is a mandate of a genuinely staggering scale.
Yeah.
The rhetoric shifts from this internal, humble reflection to an explicit global target. The believers are given the responsibility to, quote, find and bring before you the 4 billion people of humankind who are sleeping.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me. The specificity of that number is what anchors this whole section.
It's 4 billion.
Right. The prayer doesn't use vague spiritual platitudes like save the world or spread the light to the nations. It uses a hard, measurable demographic target of 4 billion people.
Yeah.
And I actually checked the historical data. In 1956, the global population was actually around 2.8 billion.
Oh, wow. I didn't realize it was that low.
Yeah, they wouldn't hit 4 billion until the 1970s.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, that means the 4 billion isn't just a census of the present. It represents the entirety of humanity projecting into the future.
Yeah.
It encompasses the totality of the human project.
And it transforms an ethereal religious concept into a concrete quota.
A quota, yeah.
Because telling someone to save humanity just feels like an impossible abstract thought experiment. But telling someone they have a quota of 4 billion sleeping people to wake up Suddenly that feels like a logistical operation.
It grounds the divine mission in empirical reality.
Exactly.
And look closely at the verbs and the metaphors chosen here because they dictate the entire operational strategy of these believers.
What do you mean?
Well, in historical religious or political rhetoric, when discussing a global mission, the language almost inevitably turns militaristic. You hear words like conquer, defeat, subdue, crush.
Crusade language, like
Right.
the world is an enemy to be vanquished.
Exactly. But this text actively avoids crusade logic. It doesn't talk about conquering humankind. It describes humanity as sleeping.
Sleeping, right.
And the mission is awakening and bringing about the work of resurrection. It frames this monumental task not as a war against adversaries, but as a global rescue operation of siblings.
Which is huge, because the psychological weight of a rescue operation is completely different from a war.
Totally different.
In a war, if the enemy pushes back too hard, a tactical retreat is perfectly acceptable. You fall back to protect your troops.
Yeah, you minimize losses.
But in a rescue mission, the people in the burning building aren't your enemies. They are your family. If you retreat, your sleeping family dies. It completely changes the posture of the believer.
The mechanism here is care functioning as a mobilizing force. The believers are told to let flames of life rise up everywhere we go.
Flames of life.
Right. These aren't destructive fires meant to burn down opposition or purge the unbelievers. They are meant to illuminate and provide warmth to those who are asleep.
Wow.
The 4 billion people out there aren't adversaries plotting against them. They are family members who simply haven't woken up yet.
Which makes the burden infinitely heavier, doesn't it? It's one thing to fight an enemy you hate, but it's another to carry the agonizing responsibility of waking up an entire world that doesn't even know it's asleep.
It's a massive shift. We have moved from foolish children staring up at the sky to people burdened with carrying the flames of life across the entire globe.
And that progression naturally leads to the most critical question of this entire deep dive.
Okay, let's hear it.
Where does the energy for this come from?
Yes.
I mean, we've established the extreme hardship, we've removed the ego, we've revealed this massive 4 billion person rescue operation. Why must they do this?
And the answer the text provides totally flips the traditional architecture of religious belief right on its head.
It really does.
It introduces a profound paradigm shift in the relationship between the human and the divine. The text pleads for the believers to realize it is their responsibility to relieve the lamentations of Christ, who has been appealing to you for our sakes.
Okay, let me just pause there, because that phrasing is shocking. Relieve the lamentations of Christ.
It's intense.
So what does this all mean? Typically, in almost every major framework we study, the flow of relief goes in one direction, right, downward.
From heaven to earth.
Exactly. Believers pray to the divine to relieve their human suffering. We ask the divine to heal our sickness, fix our finances, comfort our sorrows.
Yeah, that's the standard model.
But here, the flow is completely reversed. The believers are explicitly tasked with relieving the divine suffering.
Yeah, and the speaker continues, stating they must relieve the earnest heart of Christ, who has been working for the sake of the people of this earth for thousands of years until today.
Thousands of years.
Right. And they are warned not to drop the mission they have already shouldered, and to ensure they do not leave behind any unresolved grief.
Applying the concept of unresolved grief to the divine realm is just staggering to me. We usually think of the divine as immutable, perfect, emotionally untouchable.
Untouchable, yeah.
But by positioning Christ not as a triumphant king on a throne, but as this exhausted, grieving figure who has been toiling in the mud for thousands of years, the speaker places the ultimate emotional burden squarely on the shoulders of the believers.
This is the neuropsychology of weaponized empathy.
Weaponized empathy, I like that.
Throughout history, leaders have often used fear-based rhetoric to mobilize people, right? Threats of hellfire, damnation, political execution.
Sure, fear is a classic motivator.
But fear has a diminishing return. Eventually, the nervous system just habituates to fear and people burn out or they rebel.
That makes sense.
Empathy, however, specifically the guilt and duty tied to relieving a parent figure's suffering, is an inexhaustible, self-renewing energy source.
Oh, absolutely. Because if you fail a mission where you are the primary beneficiary, you only hurt yourself. Like if you try to start a business and it fails, you brush yourself off.
Yeah, you move on.
You can rationalize that failure. You can calculate that morality, as we discussed earlier.
Right.
But if you fail a mission where a cosmic parent has been suffering for millennia on your behalf, you aren't just letting yourself down. You are leaving the divine with unresolved grief.
It creates a scenario where giving up is an act of unspeakable cruelty. But simultaneously, this dynamic elevates the believer to a status of unparalleled importance. Notice the complete transfer of agency that has occurred here.
Because they started as foolish children.
Yes. They began as powerless entities entirely dependent on grace. But by taking on this unimaginable burden, by successfully comforting the divine, the text states they become a hero of heaven.
A hero of heaven.
They are no longer passive recipients of the universe. They are active, essential participants in the culmination of cosmic history. They hold the power to finally bring rest to an exhausted divine heart.
So the divine is essentially paralyzed by its own grief and love for humanity, making it entirely dependent on the human actor to finish the job.
Exactly.
It is wildly empowering, but it is also a crushing, terrifying burden. You start as a speck of dust at the bottom of the mountain. By the end, you realize the mountain itself is waiting for you to conquer it so it can finally rest.
It is a remarkable rhetorical journey in just a few paragraphs. I mean, the listener is moved from humility and trauma through the purging of selfish calculation into a grand demographic vision.
Right.
And finally, burdened with the ultimate emotional responsibility of comforting the Creator.
And as we bring our analysis of this 1956 text to a close, I want to leave you, our listener, with the final, deeply evocative image the speaker paints. The text describes these believers as raising up a lonely altar in the midst of a difficult environment and are crying out to and appealing to you.
A lonely altar in a difficult environment? It really captures the deep isolation of carrying a vision that the rest of the sleeping world does not yet understand.
It does. And regardless of your own beliefs or what field you operate in, there is a profound, relatable human truth in that image.
Oh, absolutely.
When you are trying to achieve anything of massive scale, whether you're attempting to shift a stubborn corporate culture, build a movement from scratch, or simply hold on to a difficult ethical standard in a world that constantly incentivizes you to calculate your morality for a quick win.
Yeah, it's exhausting.
It really is. It often feels exactly like that. It feels like you are operating on a lonely altar in a deeply hostile environment. The sheer scale of what you want to achieve feels completely mismatched with how small and vulnerable you actually feel on a daily basis.
That tension between the scale of our ambition and the reality of our vulnerability is a universal human experience. And the rhetorical framework we've examined today provides a uniquely powerful lens through which to view that isolation.
It really makes you wonder how we frame our own difficult paths, you know?
It does. Which leaves us with a provocative thought to ponder as you go about your week. Think about that concept of unresolved grief and the transfer of agency we unpacked today.
Yeah.
When we reframe our personal duties and massive goals, not just as obligations we owe to ourselves or benchmarks for our own ambition,
Right.
but as a necessary mission to relieve the long-standing burdens, the lamentations of the generations who suffered and sacrificed before us, does that change the very nature of your motivation?
When you realize the climb isn't just about planting your own flag at the summit, but about finishing a journey that someone else bled to begin, the adrenaline shifts.
It really does.
The responsibility becomes infinitely heavier. But perhaps the resolve becomes unbreakable. That whiplash between feeling completely insignificant and having the weight of the world on your shoulders, maybe that's exactly where the flames of life actually start.
Well said.
Thank you for taking the time to unpack all of this with us today on this deep dive. We'll be waiting right here at the base of the next mountain, ready for the next climb.